Hey Finxters! Now we are going to discuss an interview question which has been asked numerous number of times in the interviews, and this is a fairly simple interview question. So let's go ahead and find out what exactly this question asks us to do. Now please don't get troubled when you see the question. Like, it's a big question, so many of you might get troubled when you see this question. But trust me, this is one of the easiest question that you can come across in an interview. So you just have to read the question properly, and the solution is merely an implementation of the binary search algorithm. Yeah, that's how easy this is. So let's go ahead and read this question out, and then we will understand it with the help of an example. So the question says that we are playing the guess game, and the game is as follows. I pick a number from 1 to n. You have to guess which number I picked. Every time your guess is wrong, I will tell you whether the number I picked is higher or lower than your guess. I hope you understood that. Now let me further simplify this. I will pick a number within the range 1 to n, and you have to guess which number I picked. If your guess is wrong, in that case, I will tell you whether the number that you guessed was greater than the number that I picked, or if your guessed number was lower than the number that I picked. Now, since we have to write a program for this, so you will be given a predefined function which will return three possible results. These results are -1, which will be returned when I pick a number which is lower than your guess. Otherwise, this function will return 1, that is, when the number that I picked is higher than the number that you guessed. And if the number that I picked is same as the number that you guessed, then this function will return 0. So all you have to do is to return the number that I picked. Now, to make things clear, I made a certain animation so that you can understand the question better. And once you understand the question, the solution is not a big deal in this case. So let's go ahead and find out a conversation between two friends who are going to play the guess game. So here we have Shubham and John who are going to play this game. And the number that Shubham guessed is 8. But John does not know the number that Shubham guessed at this point of time. So Shubham asks John, "Can you guess the number I picked?" John says, "Is it 7? Shubham says, "No, the number I picked is higher than your guess." Now, when you write the program, the output that will be returned by the function in this case is 1. Because as you can see, that the number which John guessed is lower than the number that Shubham had picked. In other words, Shubham had picked a number which is higher than the number that John guessed. So once again, John asks, "Is it 8 then?" Now Shubham says, "Yes, that's the number I guessed." Now I hope with the help of this example, things are clear and you have a clear idea about what the question asks you to do. Now that was a funny example, but now it's time to dive into the algorithm which will help us to reach the final output, or which will help us to solve this problem. Now this right here is the predefined function guess, which returns -1 if the number that was picked is lower than the number that was guessed. It returns 1 if the number that was picked is greater than the number that was guessed. Otherwise, it returns 0, that is when the number that was picked is same as the number that was guessed. Now we are going to have a look at this algorithm with the help of an example. So let's consider that the number that is picked is 6, while the number that was guessed is 10. So how do we solve this? Now this is the program that will help you to reach or find a number that was picked. Now to understand how this program works, let's take the help of a diagram which will clarify all your doubts, and you will definitely understand how this is working. Now most of you by now must have identified that this is simply an implementation of the binary search algorithm. So there we go. That's the table which will help you to understand this algorithm. Now, as I already mentioned previously, that this right here is the method or the predefined method that returns -1, 1 or 0. And this method helps you to find the number that was picked. So let's begin with our algorithm. To find the picked number, we need the help of couple of indicators, or you may also call them pointers. So these pointers are low and high, such that you have to initialize low to 0 while high stores the value of n. Now what is n here? N is the number that was guessed. So the guessed number in this case is 10. So n at this point of time is 10. So that also means that high initially stores the value 10 in this case. And now why do we need the low and high variables? This is majorly because these two variables will help us to find a mid value, and this mid value will help you to find the number that was actually picked. So to further understand that, we need to dive inside a while loop. And how long do we iterate within the while loop? That's as long as the low variable is less than or equal to the high variable. That is, the value of the low variable should always be less than or equal to the value within the high variable for this loop to keep functioning. Okay, now it's the most important part of this program. We need to go ahead and find the mid value that will eventually lead us to the value that was actually picked by the other person. And how do we calculate the mid value? We simply go ahead and add the values within the low and high variables, and then we divide it by 2. Now please note that this right here is an integer division. So in the first iteration, we are simply going and adding 10 plus 0, and then we are dividing it by 2. So what is the value of mid at this point of time now? It's equal to 5. As soon as we find the value of mid, we immediately go ahead and pass the value of mid within the guess method, which is the predefined function provided to us. So this means guess now gets the value 5, and then it checks, is the value picked less than 5, greater than 5, or equal to 5. And what was the picked value? The picked value is 6. So 6 is greater than 5. That means the guess method will initially return 1. So when guess returns 1 to this method or to this function, a certain if-else block gets executed. Here we are checking, is the value returned by the guess method 0? In this case, no, it isn't. So we move inside the else block, and within this else block we once again have the nested if-else statements, wherein we check, is the value returned by the guess method equal to 1? And yes, in this case the value returned by the guess method is actually 1. And why so? Because 6, which was the picked value, was greater than 5, which was the value of mid. So this block right here gets executed. And what do we do within this block? We simply go ahead and modify the value of the low variable. So what was low until now? Low was 0, but now it becomes, or now it holds the value which is equal to mid plus 1. So that means low is now equal to 5 plus 1. That's equal to 6. So that's what happens in the first iteration. So initially in the first iteration, the value of low was 0, the value of high was 10. Then we went on and added the two values and then divided it by 2 to find the mid value, which happened to be 5. Then we forwarded or passed the value of mid to the guess method, which then returned us 1, and that was because the value picked was greater than the value of mid. Therefore, we went ahead and modified the value of low such that the value of low now became mid plus 1, which is 6. Now once low becomes 6, we can move on to the next iteration. But before that, we have to check, is the value of low less than equal to the value of high? And yes, it definitely is, because low at this point of time is 6 while high is still 10. So we can now move inside the while loop and once again go ahead and find the value of mid. Let me clear out the screen so that I can explain what happens in the next iteration. So now we once again find the value of mid. So what will be the value of mid? It will be equal to 6, which is the value within the low variable, plus 10, which is the value of the high variable, and that equals to 16, and then we divide it by 2. And what's the result of this computation? It happens to be 8. So now the value of mid is 8. So as you can see, the value of mid in the second iteration is 8. And once again we pass this mid value to the function guess. So guess now has the value 8, and is 8 greater than, less than, or equal to 6? Obviously 8 is greater than 6. This means that the picked value is less than the value that was guessed, or the value of mid. Hence this method now returns -1. And as soon as this method returns -1, the following else block gets executed. Within this else block, we are simply modifying the value of the high variable such that it is equal to mid -1. Now if you're wondering what happens in this case, we are simply saying that high equals mid, which at this point of time is 8, -1, and that's equal to 7. Okay, so we are done with our second iteration, and now it's time to move on to the third iteration. So to explain you what happens in the third iteration, let me once again go ahead and clear the screen out so that I can explain things in a better way. Okay, now Python once again checks, is the value of low less than or equal to the value of high? And yes, it is, because the value of low at this point of time is 6, while the value of high at this point of time is 7, which we found in the previous iteration. So now once again it's time to find the value of mid, and in this case it's going to be 6 plus 7 divided by 2. Since this is an integer division, so the output of this computation is 6. Hence the guess method now fetches the value 6, and then it checks if this value is greater than, less than, or equal to the picked value. And it's quite evident that now the value of mid is same as the value that was picked. Therefore the guess method returns 0. So as soon as it returns 0, then the if block gets executed and it simply returns the value of mid. And what's the value of mid? It's 6 at this point of time. Hence we have successfully guessed the value that was picked in the third iteration. So that's how this algorithm works. And now let's go ahead and execute this code in PyCharm, and let's run our code on a few examples or test cases to find if this actually works for us. Okay, so this right here is the predefined function, while this is the program that will help us to find the picked number. And the example that we are going to use to check our code is exactly the same that I explained you previously, wherein the guessed number is 10 while the actually picked number is 6. So let's go ahead and find out if this program works. And there we go. The picked number is 6. And that is exactly the number that was actually picked. Now let us also go ahead and execute a few other test cases to find out if this program works on those test cases as well. And then we can safely say that yes, this program can be used in our interview as a solution. So these are the test cases that will help us to verify our code. Okay, now let's go ahead and execute this code once again. And there we go. In the second example, when the guessed number and the picked numbers were 1, the output should have been 1, and that's what we got. In the third example, when the guessed number was 20 and the picked number was 10, the output should have been 10 once again, and 10 is what we got. Finally, when the guessed number was 10 and the picked number was 9, the output should have been 9. And that's what we got. So this means our program works perfectly fine. Let's talk about the time complexity of this code. Since this code is merely an implementation of the binary search algorithm, Hence, the time complexity of this code is log n. With that, we come to the end of this interview question. Please join me in the next lecture wherein we will be discussing another interview question. Thank you.